NATO was built to protect the West and defend its power. But in trying to hold its ground, they may have helped create something even bigger. This is how NATO accidentally helped China become so powerful. To understand this, we have to go back to the 20th century. China wasn't powerful then. For over a century, foreign empires had seized land and dictated terms at gunpoint. The Opium Wars and invasions left deep scars. China had once seen itself as the center of civilization. Then came 1949. Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. He said the Chinese people had stood up. But standing up didn't mean being strong yet. China was poor, the industry was weak, technology was outdated. It had to rebuild almost everything from scratch. And at the same time, a new alliance was forming in Europe. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was created. Its goal was simply to stop the spread of Soviet power. NATO was designed to unite Western countries under one military shield. It was focused on Europe and the Atlantic world. China wasn't the main target, but it was part of the global Cold War story. During the early Cold War, China aligned with the Soviet Union. The Korean War broke out in 1950. China fought against US-led forces. Tensions were high. The world felt divided into two camps. NATO strengthened its military presence. The United States expanded bases, alliances, and defense spending. As for China, this meant something important. China watched how Western powers organized themselves. They saw centralized military command. They saw advanced technology. They saw how industry supported war. And they learned. China's early leaders understood that power in the modern world came from factories, steel, oil, and weapons. Not just culture or philosophy. Western alliances like NATO showed how coordinated states could project influence far beyond their borders. This was lesson number one. Modern power depends on industry. China tried to copy parts of the Soviet model first. It focused on heavy industry. It built steel plants. It invested in military production. Some efforts failed badly, especially during the Great Leap Forward. But the goal was always to never be weak again. Then, something unexpected happened. In the 1970s, the United States and China began to talk. The Soviet Union had become the bigger threat to both sides. NATO was still focused mainly on Europe and the Soviet bloc. China started to engage with the West economically. Western companies began investing in China. Factories opened. Technology transferred. Some believed it would even make China more democratic over time. China used that access carefully, allowing foreign companies in, but under rules. It learned from them and studied supply chains. It absorbed knowledge about engineering and global trade networks. Western markets welcomed China exports. Cheap manufacturing in China lowered costs for consumers in Europe and North America. And then, China became the world's factory. It invested in ports, railways, high-speed trains, power plants, educating millions of engineers. It accumulated foreign currency reserves. It modernized its navy and air force slowly and steadily. The West was busy fighting wars in the Middle East. China was building infrastructure at home. This wasn't planned by NATO, but it created space. When the United States and NATO allies spent trillions on overseas conflicts, China invested in economic growth. China watched and waited. By the 2010s, China had become the second largest economy in the world. It surpassed many NATO countries in manufacturing output. It launched ambitious projects like the Belt and Road Initiative. This plan aimed to build routes all across the world. Some of these projects reached into regions where NATO influence was limited. China offered loans and infrastructure instead of military alliances. Countries that once relied mostly on Western investment now had another option. But would they stop there? Not at all. China also learned from NATO's organizational structure. It strengthened its own centralized state system. Decision-making became more focused. The Communist Party maintained tight control. Stability and sovereignty became core priorities. The memory of foreign domination still mattered deeply. Chinese leaders often referred to the century of humiliation. That history shaped policy. Territorial integrity became non-negotiable. Taiwan, Tibet, Xinjiang, and the South China Sea were not just strategic points. they were symbols of unity. NATO's existence reinforced this mindset. From Beijing's perspective, Western alliances could encircle and pressure states. China wanted to make sure it could never be isolated that way. So they built economic ties across continents, invested in Africa, expanded trade in Latin America, and deepened partnerships in Southeast Asia. Instead of forming a military alliance like NATO, China built networks of economic dependence. Technology became another battlefield. NATO countries led in advanced research for decades, but China increased spending on science and development. When Western governments raised concerns about security risks in technology infrastructure, it reflected growing tension. The world was no longer unipolar. Some historians argue that pressure creates strength. When a nation feels surrounded, it tightens internally. It makes itself stronger. That pattern can be seen in China's modern rise. NATO never intended to help China grow. Its focus was on defending Europe and later addressing global security threats. But by concentrating energy in certain regions, it indirectly allowed China to rise with less interference during key decades. Globalization also played a role. NATO countries promoted free trade and open markets. They encouraged global supply chains. China entered the World Trade Organization in 2001. Access to global markets accelerated its growth dramatically. Western leaders believed integration would reshape China. Instead, China reshaped global trade. This created a feedback loop. Economic strength funded military modernization, while military modernization protected economic interests. Infrastructure investments extended influence, which in turn increased access to resources and markets. All of this happened while NATO countries debated budgets and political priorities. Today, China fields the world's largest military by personnel with a navy that is rapidly expanding. It's central to global manufacturing, deeply embedded in international trade networks. None of this happened overnight. It happened step by step, over decades. NATO's actions were not only the reason for China's rise. China's own reforms under Deng Xiaoping were critical. Domestic discipline and long-term planning mattered. Cultural resilience played a role. But the international environment shaped the path. When Western alliances expanded and focused elsewhere, China found room to grow. When Western markets opened, China entered. When NATO emphasized military solutions, China emphasized economic ones. And history often works like this. One side makes a move to protect itself. Another side adapts and grows stronger in response. No one sets out to create a rival, but competition evolves. Today, NATO views China as a strategic challenge. It speaks about supply chain security, technological competition, and global influence. China views NATO as part of a Western system that once dominated the world and still seeks to shape global rules. Both sides carry history in their decisions. Understanding the story doesn't mean choosing sides. It means seeing how actions connect. The past shapes the present. Policies made for one purpose can lead to unexpected outcomes. NATO was meant to contain threats, but in the shifting world of the Cold War and beyond, its focus and strategies created space. Space for China to industrialize, space to learn and modernize without direct confrontation for decades. And China used that space wisely. Today, the global balance of power looks different than it did in 1949. The world is more multipolar. Economic networks are intertwined. Military alliances remain strong, but new centers of influence have emerged. History rarely moves in straight lines. Sometimes, attempts to secure dominance plant the seeds of competition. And that is how NATO, without meaning to, helps China become so powerful. If you found this perspective interesting, there's so much more to explore about modern geopolitics and how history shapes today's world. Thank you for watching.